10 minutes after standing on stage and declaring that every family deserved a safe place to sleep, Billionaire, Graham Whitmore saw a single mother dragging a mattress alone through the cold rain. He assumed she was taking it to a new home, but when he learned her true destination, Graham realized that the speech that had just earned him hundreds of rounds of applause might have been the biggest lie of his career. The black SUV carrying Graham left downtown Baltimore, where models of gleaming glass towers were still displayed beneath the stage lights. The investors' applause still echoed in his mind as the vehicle moved deeper into an old neighborhood submerged in the late-season rain. Graham was looking down at his phone when the SUV slowed at an intersection. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw a black woman struggling along the roadside with a twin mattress loosely wrapped in clear plastic that had torn in several places. She used one shoulder to keep the mattress from falling while pulling a small cart whose wheels rattled violently whenever they struck a pothole. Her coat had darkened with rain, and the hair braided neatly at the back of her neck was soaked, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving as car after car passed her by. "Stop," Graham said. The driver looked at him through the rearview mirror, seemingly unsure whether he had heard correctly. Graham repeated himself more firmly this time, then opened the door and stepped out before the SUV had fully stopped. The woman turned as he approached. Exhaustion was clearly visible on her face, but her eyes remained guarded. Graham offered to help, but she immediately shook her head and said she only had a few more blocks to go. At that moment, a powerful gust swept across the street, ripping the plastic loose and knocking the mattress off the cart. It tipped toward the edge of a puddle, pulling the woman forward with it. Graham caught one end before it fully struck the pavement. He looked at her, breathing hard in the pouring rain. "Where are you moving to?" The woman tightened the plastic around the mattress and answered in a quiet but resolute voice, "This mattress isn't mine." She turned and pointed toward the end of the street. There was no apartment building or motel there, only an old church with boarded-up windows and a faded sign announcing that it was no longer in operation. Tamika did not explain further. She pulled the plastic tight around the mattress, then carried it with Graham through the alley behind the church. The side door stood slightly open, revealing a dark hallway that smelled of dampness. Inside, the pews were gone, replaced by blankets spread along the walls, bags of clothing, and a few boxes of food. Graham stopped short when he saw 5 families sheltering there. A young mother named Monique Hayes hurried toward them, her face filled with embarrassment. In the corner, her 7-year-old son Isaiah was curled beneath 2 blankets, a dry cough rising from his small chest. Tamika and Graham set the mattress against the driest wall. When Monique thanked her in a choked voice, Tamika only said that beginning tonight, Isaiah would no longer have to sleep on the concrete floor. Graham asked where Tamika and her daughter were sleeping. She avoided his eyes, but at that moment, Zaria ran out and dropped a small pillow and a toothbrush from her backpack. Through a cracked window, Graham saw an old sedan parked outside its rear windows, completely covered with blankets. "You bought this mattress for that boy while you and your daughter are sleeping in the car." Tamika looked at Isaiah, her voice calm in a way that was almost painful. "My daughter at least has a car seat. That boy only has the concrete floor." At that moment, Graham noticed a relocation notice resting on a box of files. In the lower corner was the logo of Whitmore Urban Partners. The logo made Graham freeze. Whitmore Urban Partners had recently purchased Bayview Courts, and according to the report he had signed, residents were supposed to receive 60 days' notice, relocation assistance, and temporary housing before the complex was closed. Yet, all around him were families sleeping inside an abandoned church. Tamika pulled a box of files closer. Inside were returned envelopes, photographs of locked apartment doors, call receipts, and emails no one had answered. Some families had received only 10 days' notice. Some people had been labeled uncooperative, even though they had called the office repeatedly. Several checks had even been mailed to company addresses that had already been sealed off. When Graham asked how long she had been collecting all of this, Tamika said she had started the day the first neighbor was forced onto the street. She had not known who he was until Zaria recognized his face on the billboard outside the property. The room fell silent. Monique held Isaiah closer, while Darnell stepped in front of the other families as if Graham had become a threat. Graham offered to move everyone into a hotel that night. Tamika did not thank him. She simply closed the file and asked, "What about next week?" Then she placed a handwritten spreadsheet in front of him. The total amount of assistance that had never reached the families had climbed past $180,000. Graham stepped into the hallway to call Wesley Harrow, but his voice still carried clearly into the silent room. When he heard the figure of $180,000, Wesley paused for only a few seconds before explaining that some residents had submitted their paperwork late, refused the apartments arranged for them, or could not be reached. He spoke as if the families lying on the church floor were nothing more than incorrectly entered data fields. Wesley advised Graham to leave before the press found out. The company could pay for a few nights at a hotel, provide emergency assistance, and require the families to sign confidentiality agreements, then turn the rest over to the legal department. It was a clean, quick solution that would not delay the project. Tamika had heard him. She stepped closer, her hands still red from the cold, and said she did not need to appear in one of the company's charity campaigns. She wanted the assistance money to reach the right people. No family to be forced out of the church before they had somewhere safe to live, and all relocation records to be made public for review. Graham felt his frustration rising. He was offering hotel rooms food and money, yet Tamika still looked at him as if none of it was enough. "At least you can accept a solution for tonight," he said. Tamika looked toward Zaria and Isaiah. Poor people are always given one safe night then left with the same problem the next morning. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. A city employee stepped inside and posted a red notice on the wall the building was not approved for occupancy. Everyone had to leave within 48 hours. The next morning, Zaria fell asleep during math class. Her teacher woke her and realized that the sweater she was wearing was the same one from the day before. When asked for her current address, Zaria lowered her head, gripped the edge of the desk with both hands, and said nothing. Less than an hour later, Tamika's phone rang in the middle of her shift at the hospital cafeteria. The school wanted to verify where Tamika and her daughter were living. If Zaria was sleeping in a car, a social worker might have to intervene to ensure her safety. Tamika rushed into the break room, closed the door, and leaned against the wall. For the first time since losing their home, the strength in her face crumbled. She was not as afraid of going hungry or sleeping in the freezing cold as she was of a stranger looking at their circumstances and deciding that she was not fit to be a mother. Graham arrived after Darnell told him what had happened. He offered to rent an apartment for Tamika and Zaria immediately, but she shook her head. She could not leave the other families behind simply because she had happened to attract the attention of a billionaire. Zaria pulled her mother aside. Her eyes were red, but her voice remained calm. "Can you be strong after we have somewhere to sleep?" The question left Tamika silent. She understood that her pride was forcing her daughter to pay the price. Finally, she agreed to accept hotel rooms on the condition that every family went with them. Graham immediately instructed his assistant to reserve the entire ground floor of a nearby hotel, but check-in was quickly delayed when 3 families no longer had identification. Their wallets, birth certificates, and medical records were still trapped inside the locked apartments at Bayview Courts. Graham stepped into the hallway, called the hotel manager directly, and declared that his company would guarantee all expenses and vouch for the identities of the families. Just as he waited for confirmation from the other end of the line, an urgent report appeared on his phone. The signatures of several residents on the payment records showed signs of forgery. While the families packed their belongings and waited for the vehicles to pick them up, Graham's audit team began comparing the suspicious signatures with the bank records. The report reached Graham before midnight. The audit team discovered that Whitmore Urban Partners had hired an outside company to manage the relocation at Bayview Courts. On paper, the assistance money had been paid, but many of the accounts that received it did not belong to the residents. 3 employees had previously raised concerns about unusual complaints, and all 3 reports had been closed under instructions from Wesley's office. If the property was not turned over on time, the company would lose a major funding package, while Wesley's bonus depended on the construction start date. For the first time, Graham understood that he had not simply been deceived by a subordinate. He had built a system that rewarded speed and profit without measuring who was being left behind. He wanted to fire Wesley immediately, but the lawyers warned that acting too quickly could compromise the investigation and give him time to destroy evidence. Graham was forced to wait, even though every passing minute made him feel complicit. That night, the power at the church was cut off. The heaters stopped working and Isaiah suffered an asthma attack in the darkness. When Graham rushed there, he found Tamika kneeling on the concrete floor holding the boy, while Darnell shone a flashlight as everyone tried to create hot steam with a basin. The sound of an ambulance siren rose outside. Graham stood frozen. A child could have died because of decisions signed inside his office. The file concerning Tamika's old debt appeared in the newspaper the following morning. The article did not mention that she had missed several weeks of work to care for her husband during the final months of his life. Nor did it say that she had already paid the debt in full. It only questioned whether a woman who had once been sued for late rent was qualified to manage a housing program, and whether Graham was using company money to help someone he had only just met on the street. The rumors spread faster than any explanation. At the hospital, several co-workers looked at Tamika with suspicion. Outside the school, Zaria heard parents whispering that her mother was turning poverty into an opportunity to make money. Graham wanted the communications department to speak publicly in her defense, but Tamika refused. She did not want to be turned into a polished symbol the company could use to hide what had happened. Instead, she decided to speak at the city council hearing on the Bayview Courts project. The night before the meeting, Tamika admitted to Zaria that she had once believed being strong meant never needing anyone's help. Zaria held her mother's hand and said, "Maybe being strong means knowing when to let someone stand beside you." For the first time, Tamika did not prepare alone. Monique organized the family's testimony. Darnell cross-checked the records and a former Whitmore employee agreed to testify that Wesley had ordered complaints to be ignored. But just before the hearing, Graham received instructions from the board of directors he was not to publicly admit any legal liability on behalf of the company. The city council chamber was packed when Tamika and Darnell carried the old mattress inside and placed it in front of the first row of seats. Wesley was already there, coldly insisting that Whitmore Urban Partners had followed proper procedure and that any mistakes belonged solely to the subcontractor. Tamika did not respond with anger. She opened the files one by one, unanswered emails, photographs of late notices, records of missing money, and forged signatures. Then a former employee stood and confirmed that Wesley had ordered complaints closed so the project would not be delayed. The room fell completely silent when Tamika placed her hand on the mattress. She said it was not a prop, but the place where a child had been forced to wait on a cold concrete floor because adults had reduced his family's life to a few lines in a spreadsheet. Graham looked at the board's directive, then folded it. He stood and publicly admitted that the company had failed and that the ultimate responsibility belonged to the leader who had created that system. He announced that the project would be suspended, the assistance money would be repaid, an independent compensation fund would be established, the motel would be converted into transitional housing, and oversight authority would be given to the resident council. At that moment, 2 investigators entered. New financial records showed that Wesley had received money from the relocation contractor. As he was escorted out, he looked back, but no one avoided Tamika's gaze anymore. 1 year later, the old motel near the bus line was no longer a forgotten building behind an iron fence. The peeling walls had been repainted, the windows glowed with light every evening, and the sign at the entrance carried a name chosen by the residents themselves, the Bridge Center. The 36 small rooms were now a place where families could live safely while looking for work, saving money, and preparing for a permanent home. Tamika did not accept an honorary title just to appear in promotional photographs. She completed a community housing management training program and became the director of resident services with a fair salary. Monique had moved into her own apartment near Isaiah's school. The boy was healthier and often returned to the center after school to read in the computer room. Darnell managed the maintenance team and opened a woodworking training class for young people in the neighborhood. Zaria finally had a bedroom of her own. On her new bed was a soft mattress, but she still kept the old pillow she had once carried in the car. Not to remember the freezing nights, but to remember that she and her mother had not given up. Graham still visited the Bridge Center, but he no longer stood at the center of every photograph. In new projects, resident representatives were involved from the first day, and executive bonuses were tied to whether families actually found stable housing. One afternoon, Tamika stepped outside the center and saw a young mother struggling to pull an old crib off a bus. She did not ask what mistakes the woman had made or whether she deserved help. Tamika simply stepped forward and lifted one end. Several other residents immediately ran out to hold the rest. The crib was carried inside without anyone having to carry it alone. Because sometimes change does not begin with a wealthy person reaching down. It begins when people are willing to stand beside one another, when those with power learn to listen, and when someone who was once helped turns back to lift another person's burden. True strength does not lie in enduring everything alone, but in building a community where no one is left behind.